what engineering does is like you always have like a certain understanding of how things work on a fundamental level.
Mhm.
Whichever discipline of engineering you go into, you end up understanding how things actually work on a fundamental level, and that's just always something cool to know. I will say that because of how technical the field is, and this is honestly for anyone, like don't feel like the job is what's going to define who you are.
Mm.
I think that's something that I have learned, like, as I've matured, right? Like, I'm not an engineer. Like, who I am is like how I am when I talk to you. Like, do I look you in your eyes and listen to you? That's who you are.
Mm.
Am I able to? Are you able to share experiences with me? And you're like, you know what? I can trust this person. That's who you
Mm.
are. And just your general outlook on the world around you. That's who you are. How
Mm.
you contribute and feed your family is one thing, and hopefully it's as noble as you can muster, right? But you outside of the job is also important.
Welcome to Show Your Receipts, where we believe if you can see it, you can be it. Receipts are evidence or proof that something has occurred. Our guests are evidence that Black excellence is alive and well. They will be sharing their receipts on how they've been able to accomplish so much in their life. I'm your host, Tony Jackson. Let's get started. Welcome to Show Your Receipts, where we believe if you can see it, you can be it. I am super excited to introduce our guest today. This has been a friend of mine for a few years, and he has an incredible story. I'm excited to get a chance to dig deep into his accomplishments. The gentleman we're going to be speaking to today is an accomplished graduate of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign with a degree in chemical engineering. He's dedicated over 13 years to his profession. His career spanned throughout the Chicagoland area in various sectors, including specialty chemicals, plastics, and oil and gas. His expertise and contributions have made a significant impact in these fields, reflecting his commitment to advancing industry standards and practices. And we have him here today. I want to introduce to you Kwaku Okraku. What's up, brother?
All good, brother. I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Man, I'm excited to have you here, man. I have the utmost respect for what you do,
Thank you,
specifically
sir.
because I know that I could not do it. You know what I mean? It's like I believe that God blessed different people with different skills and abilities, and that manifests itself in what they're able to do career wise or work wise. And the engineering mindset that you have, the engineering skill set that you have, to me is just it's almost magical as far as how much respect I have for what you guys are able and capable of doing. And so I'm excited to dig in and ask you a bunch of questions in regards to your career. And so let's just get started.
Sure.
How old were you when you decided that you wanted to become an engineer? Was this a childhood dream that you always had? When did this vision come about for you?
Great question. Well, I mean, probably, my first love was football, but I realized early on that I was okay athletic, but I wasn't going to be getting hit like that. And my parents weren't going. I had an older cousin who blew his knee out in high school and stuff, and that wasn't going to happen. Try some of the other sports, basketball and stuff like that, but I always knew sports wise, I wasn't going to be the esteemed Tony Jackson, former NFL player. But as far as engineering, I've always had an aptitude for math and science. So I caught on to that early on. So I kind of had just let that kind of just drive, the courses that I took as, I went through school and things like that. I thought about medicine, but I always knew that I wasn't into blood or any of that. And,
Mm-hmm.
that just wasn't my calling. That wasn't for me. So I
Mm-hmm.
was pretty undecided about what I was going to do for a while. And then I got to high school and I took chemistry. I think it was probably freshman or sophomore year. And I was like, I like this. So I was like, all right, I'll be a chemist, right? Um, And I think one of the point that it veered over to engineering, that was key for me, that we're probably going to talk about more is all like the more mentors slash, figures of representation, right? That you get exposed to, can introduce you to that hustle that you can end up being good at and that you end up enjoying, right? So my older cousin is in computers. And he was like, when he learned from my parents, my interests, he was like, okay, well, what about chemical engineering? You like chemistry, it's engineering is like a little bit more practical. You also don't necessarily have to go to school that long, this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, okay. And salary wise, they can make similar, if not more. Okay, all right. I think I'm sold. And then I ended up taking AP chemistry, I think junior year, and junior year is around that time where you're starting to look at schools and stuff. I was like, yeah, I will try and pursue that. And so I pretty much just kind of rode that out. Finished, Whitney Young Magna High School here in Chicago with good grades and got into University of Illinois. It was between University of Illinois and Georgia Tech, but University of Illinois just being closer to home and it was cheaper. And I was able to. A lot of friends from high school were already going to the school. Ended up being able to meet a lot of future students who also looked like me that were from the Chicagoland area. So that all sold me. So where I ended up meeting your brother-in-law. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Shout out to Simi.
Yeah.
And so it seems like it was a progressive series of events that made you realize, okay, first I'm kind of good at this math and science thing, and then you started to meet people who gave you a little bit of direction on what that could mean for you.
Yeah. I think probably the first thing that happened. So, I grew up in Chicago on the South Side. I grew up in Kenwood. I grew up from kindergarten to third grade. I went to my neighborhood school, Shoesmith, which is still there. It was a solid school from the standpoint that I was going to school with all Black people. So from the social aspect, that I think that's never happened again.
Yeah.
You start to value those spaces more and more, right? And scholastically, I was always doing well. I think my mom and even my teachers knew that just so the skills that I was showing, that I could be challenged more, right? I think there was even some early conversation about me possibly skipping a grade, but I didn't want to do that just socially. I was like, nah, I can't be that smart. So my mom was like, all right. My mom was a stay-at-home mom at the time. And she was like, all right, I'm going to see if I can get you into one of these, what they call magnet schools in Chicago, where you basically kind of have to test into them or show good test scores, right? Here we had what they called Iowa test scores for the lower grades. And so she basically was shopping me around, shopping my resume, my, first, second, third grade resume around. Ended up just sitting in the school I went to's principal's office for half the day until he had time to talk to her. Yeah, it's not like I knew this at the time, right? But and was like, yo, take my son, this is what he been doing and this and that. And I ended up getting accepted. So that was Mark Sheridan Magnet School in Bridgeport. So I went there for 3 years, and there I went from an all Black school to now it was everybody. It was Black, white, Asian, Hispanic. So that it was cool getting that type of exposure early. As well as scholastically, it was a step up, but I was able to take the challenge and do all that, and then ended up testing into Whitney Young and started actually 7th to 8th grade there, and then into high school. So
That's amazing. Shout out to your mom. Let's talk about that for a second. Like, it's clear that she was your, she was your advocate. She was like your agent, you know what I mean? As a little
for real,
kid, she
facts.
saw
Yep,
something in you and was proactive in finding a way to match the talent that she saw in you to an environment that could help you grow and flourish. Do you think
absolutely.
you would be where you're at today if your mom hadn't been so so aggressive in finding an educational outlet for you?
No, no, and as you grow and you start finding out these stories about your background versus others' background, right? And you know, we didn't grow up with a silver spoon. We grew up in an apartment, two apartment complexes until my junior year of high school. Uh, but what my parents did do, and was my dad being always fiscally responsible. Luckily, he was able to, when he came to the States, he was able to find a way to work and go to school full time to get his
Mm,
college degree. And then, able to eventually, get all his citizenship stuff, settled, and ended up meeting my mom. So then he brought my mom here like a year before I was born. And my mom taking the sacrifice to be a stay-at-home mom. Like my mom
mm,
was a bright woman, back in Ghana. It's just, lack of opportunity. Uh,
yeah.
but she had me and my younger sister, and she was a stay-at-home mom until we got a little bit older, and then she started going to school. But yeah, so up until that time, like she was, I heard someone on another podcast call their stay-at-home wife a domestic engineer. That's a fact. That's exactly what she was. That's exactly what she was. And then, my dad always being able to be dependable, not a gambler, not a heavy drinker, all these
Yeah,
things
yeah.
that, you think are normal, but, not everybody always experiences them. So, uh, kind of that foundation at home being set, and, my mom kind of being able to have that time to see what I was about and be like, all right, I know you like this school. It's right around the corner. It's a short little walk, but we're gonna see if we can step it up a notch so you can, realize all your full potential. So,
Wow. I mean, your story is the epitome of the American dream, right? The
oh, so
idea of people coming from other parts of the world
mm,
to make a better way for their family. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by Isaac Newton, and it says, "If I've seen further, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants." And you
absolutely,
literally have parents who have been those shoulders for you to stand on. Talk to me about the engineering field. Um, do you see because I know we could look at
yeah.
statistics and it would say a lot of different things about African Americans in STEM, African Americans in engineering overall. Do you think that the disparity in the numbers is more of a um like a family resource thing where people maybe don't have that kind of support that you have,
Mhm.
or is it an economic thing? What are your thoughts on why there aren't more people of color, at least of African descent, in these kind of positions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of everything you just said, uh, and you hope that as we move forward, we can just continue to provide, you know, what's the proper word? I guess marginalized, communities, right, to get them more exposure and more tools, right? So why did I have to change schools to get to where I needed to go, right? Why
Right.
that's a fundamental issue, right? I like my local public school and being around all my people, but
Yeah.
how much has public education been gutted? How many schools on the south side and west side of my city have been shut down with
Mm,
no real true alternatives? Not to get super political, but
yeah.
uh, you just hope that people can that we can realize that, like, not everybody starts at the same place for various reasons, and it's worthy of us to look at those reasons and target and bring real solutions to not just focus on like equal opportunity, but like being serious about equitable outcomes. Like, how for real are we that the nation wants to see this amount of Black people as tech people, right, versus laborers, right? Like when people start asking themselves that question and what that would actually mean. But yeah, it's a combination of all those things. I know I didn't necessarily give a straight answer, but
no, that's good. That's good. So let's talk about your time at in Champaign.
sure.
Um, I've heard stories about the challenges. One of my good friends, he played football at University of Toledo. He was a
Okay.
groomsman in my wedding, but he was also an engineering major. So he did football and engineering at the same time. A big, huge
I don't
commitment.
know how he did
I don't know
it.
how he did so much so that when he declared his major, his coach came to him and was like, "Do you want to play football? Like, you're not going to be able to do both of these things." Good thing that he figured it out. He ended up getting a career-ending injury while he was playing, and thank God that he was already doing something
Right.
that was going to set him up foundationally. But talk to me about the commitment of becoming an engineer, and what that means, because it's almost like if you make the decision to be an engineering major, it's arguably the most difficult 4-year major that's out there. Arguably, you probably
Agreed.
can't find too many other 4-year majors that are more challenging than engineering. So much challenging that you guys don't have to go get a master's after you're done with like you get the engineering major. They're like, okay, you went through the gauntlet. Talk to me about the level of commitment that's required to be able to do that and what undergrad was like for you.
Yeah. So engineering is probably the closest thing to a trade, right? And I think that's why it ends up being so challenging because after college, after college, you're expected to be able to use those skills directly uh, for specific tasks that are
Mhm,
defined,
mhm,
uh, and some that aren't defined but still need your skills to build definition around whatever industry you're going into.
mhm,
So, like, I mean, at U of I, the engineering major actually cost a little bit more per
mm,
semester. As yeah, it cost the extra labs and things that we had to pay for.
mhm,
So, and yeah, the experience as an engineering major at University of Illinois or probably anywhere else, like you're not the same student. Like you can try to go to all the same parties and things, and you realize like no matter what, after that first semester, if that didn't kind of scare you or whatever, like over time you realize like you just have to go about it a little bit differently from everybody. But and just to be okay with it, Um, and so, and like, I'd say that engineering is believe it or not, engineering at a in college is very much a community type of experience. As far as like, you can't really get by trying to just study on your own. You're being
mm,
taught by like PhD slash, just super technical, very, very bright individuals that either worked in industry or just have been teaching in academia the whole time. And, the research that they're doing on the side is, you know, uh, basically like cutting edge technology into, pushing anything that you can think of forward from, computers, the internet, medicine, solving cancer. Like it's like that level. So like, and these are the people that are coming up with questions for 18, 19, 20-year olds, and they can't always scale it down, they can't always dumb
mm,
it down. So uh working with working with the teaching assistants of these professors ends up being super important. You start learning networking and politicking very early because, like, unless you were just even brighter than what I might have looked like in third grade, like I'm talking about like top tier, like
Yeah.
you likely can't make it on your own. And so that becomes a whole like little mini battle in yourself. Like, whoa, like, I mean, I've always gotten A's in all of my classes, my whole whatever school they threw at me, and then I get to U of I, and I'm getting C's and being happy with it. Like, what? Yeah. So it's definitely a different experience, but one that I think, it's been worthwhile because I haven't had to go back to school. I do know engineers that have gone back to school, once they kind of realize I just want to do something a little bit different. But I don't think they'll ever say that they regretted doing the engineering in the first place. The mindset that the mindset it puts you in. The biggest thing about engineering, no matter like which technical aspect that you decide to, which discipline you pursue, it's the problem solving, right? It's that part of your brain, whichever part of your brain. I'm not a biomedical guy, so I'm not sure if it's frontal, back, whatever, but whichever part of your brain for problem solving, knowing it's not always a linear process and being able to be patient and state your case and solve problems, and if it doesn't work out, being able to pivot, like that's applicable anywhere. That's applicable in your own personal life. So but yeah, they're often very complex problems, and that doesn't make for an easy college experience all the time.
Absolutely. So when you were going through the process, did you recognize like, man, I can't do, because we kind of had that as a student athlete, you recognize, wow, like all my classes have to be done by 2:00 so I can go to practice. Like,
Right.
I have to do all of these, I have to be here throughout the whole summer, whether I want to or not. Like, you start
Yeah.
to realize really quickly playing football that I have to operate and live differently than all of these people who I'm in a dorm with. Did you also have that realization while you were going through college, or did you kind of
Yeah.
realize it after you were done? Okay.
Oh no, by the end of freshman year, I was like, I mean, if something doesn't change, I'm not even gonna be able to stay in the major that I'm in, you know, uh, let alone do whatever else after. So, yeah, I'd say it took another year. Even my sophomore year, I was kind of just treading water a little bit, but my sophomore year, I took the time to start to, make those connections with others in my class a little bit more. And, as somebody that, so my graduating class was like, I think it was like 120 people. And I'm pretty sure that there were four of us that were African American in the end. So,
Wow.
1, 2, 3,
Wow.
4. Yeah, there was
Wow.
more of us. And I think like maybe 2 or 3 Latinos that I can remember.
Mm.
So, and then it's not like the rest of the folks that weren't of color were from Chicago. They were, further out in the suburbs, central Illinois, southern Illinois, you know, outside the state. So, just being able to adjust, bringing yourself to the party, and then maybe even sort of adding some different things to yourself, to adding some different slang, or just adjusting, right? Just
Yeah.
adjusting culturally to be able to make everyone feel comfortable that, hey, like,
Yeah.
yeah, we're different, but we're similar enough. We can laugh and we can get some of this work done and exchange resources. And that you bring
Absolutely.
something to the table. You're not just somebody there to just extract, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I was pretty proud of myself because I think that first semester junior year ended up with like a 3.6 GPA, and
Wow.
that was the same. That was the same year that Obama got elected president, and like the day he got elected president, I actually couldn't like celebrate like everybody else was because I had this like physical chemistry test the next day. And then I was like, all right, Obama, for you, I'm gonna do good on this test. I got an A on it.
And I know Michelle was happy too. You guys both Whitney Young
Right.
alum.
Facts.
You like,
Yep.
I do it for Michelle.
Yeah, I do it for Michelle.
You just touched on some very good things. You touched on some things that you did association wise to be able to kind of relate with the other engineering majors who may not have the same background as you.
Yep.
And you mentioned that incredible statistic, 120 graduates, only 4 of African-American descent, maybe another 3 or 4 Hispanics.
Yep.
Talk to me about, because I'm assuming the journey began with that 120 number being a lot higher. And I'm assuming the journey began with that 4 people graduating being a lot higher. You talk to me about what you did to make it. Let's invert this, like Charlie Munger says, let's invert this. What were some of the things that people were doing who didn't make it? What were some of the common attributes or habits that you felt like caused some people who during the journey had to change their major or maybe dropped out or whatever the case may be? Did you see any common occurrences in that way?
I feel like at some point it comes down to like how bad do you think you really want it, you know? As cliche as that might sound. And like I don't want to say like not making it excuse. I can't think of a ton of people that I can remember that ended up transferring out of the major, but I think at some point it's funny because I'm reading. It's a great question. I'm reading this book right now called "Quit," actually, and it's about like the art of quitting and how like what Western aesthetics and American culture is always about like persevering no matter what and all that, and that's not always the right answer. So for the people that quote unquote didn't make it, that doesn't necessarily mean that they failed. You know,
right? Good point. That's a good
I
point.
want to start there. It doesn't mean that they failed. They may have just realized, at least before it was too late, that if it's not working wherever, whether it was like their starting point or just whatever may have come their way, it's just not working. That's okay. All I can say is how I got through it was just watching the people around me who seemed to be doing well, that they weren't just doing it by themselves. There were a lot of study groups. So I was like, all right, well, I got to start integrating myself into these study groups. And then also realizing that like I wasn't just going to be able to just pop into a study group if they didn't feel like it was going to be worth it or they could relate to me or like that the vibes were there, et cetera, right? And so I guess fortunately for me, like I just made a conscious effort to keep working on it. It's funny, I ran into some of my old college classmates, and I told them the story of my sophomore year organic chemistry class. And I think it was like that second week. So I'm 19 at this point. Remember, I grew up in Chicago, been here my whole life. I'm hip hop to the end, right? So like it was like the second week of school, and I think from my summer job or whatever, or maybe my parents had sent me a little money. So I had what I thought was like fresh gear on. I had some fresh white ones, some shorts that were a little long, a white tee that was definitely a little long, and a white box fitted hat with the Chicago skyline in the back. And I came and I walked into class. And
clean. You were clean. You walked in clean. Chicago clean.
I was Chicago clean.
Yeah.
And I might have been like a little bit late, like 2 or 3 minutes late, right? So I walk in and the professor was looking at me like, is this the right class? Do you belong here? And yes, while that was frustrating to feel in the moment, it was also like a teaching moment in that, one of the things that I did learn from my pops, right? Like when you're in Rome, you do what the Romans do. So, that
Right.
whole first semester, I might have felt like, some of the African Americans who maybe grew up in the suburbs or whatnot, who maybe weren't dressing like me, maybe I thought that was lame or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But did that make it easier for them to relate to the people that they knew that they were going to need to help them get to where they needed to? Yeah. So I was like, all right, okay. That doesn't mean that I forget who I am.
Right.
Just learning different tools to adjust and adding to myself. I can wear a polo too, right?
Right.
Now I'm going to Express and
Yeah.
shop in the clearance section for my polos and
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? Just to not feel like I'm such a standout. Like, no, like it might not have looked earlier in the semester like I belong here, but I believe that I belong here. So I'm gonna show y'all.
Absolutely.
And then, I felt like that translated to my academics too, right? Because you take that pressure off, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, ain't no more coming to class with a do rag or fitted. I don't want that type of. I don't want those eyes. I don't want that type of attention. If you think that
Right.
because of that, I'm not as smart as y'all, I don't want to have that discussion. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Man, that's a deep point, Kwaku. Let's dig into that because I feel like in our community we have a deep need to feel like we keeping it real. We have a deep need oftentimes to feel like I haven't changed. You know what I mean? I'm just the same
Mhm.
person I always been. The idea of being authentic, I feel like we are saddled with that responsibility more than anybody else. Like there is no
I agree.
responsibility if you're a Chinese American or a white American to behave a certain way to show that you're white, to show that you're a Chinese. But oftentimes we put these extra responsibilities on us on how we're supposed to dress or talk or whatever, and kind of put ourselves in a box. How did you how did you break out of that to feel like, you know what, I'm just here to I got a specific goal. I realize that I need to connect with the community that I'm going to be working and studying with, and I'm going to put, some of these fashion choices or whatever. That's not my priority. My priority is, making these connections. Where did that thought process come for you, and how did you kind of get to that point and think through that?
Um, I want to say like maybe it was just some I don't know survival instincts. I
Mm,
mean, like, uh, I hadn't felt the need to do that before, but what I had been doing and what I could maybe quote unquote get away with, it didn't feel like it was working. So
mm,
uh, I think it was like a overtime thing, like okay, uh, if this is something that you really want, what I think I'm not sure if back then I wrote any of these things down, but for anybody watching, like, you know, when you feel like you're somewhere that you don't want to be and you feel like you need to get to that other spot, jotting down a couple notes of what you think you got to change, uh, or at least having a mental note. I had the mental notes, right? Like, all
mhm,
right, I'm I mean, I got nothing else to lose. I think that's kind of what, the mindset. And as far as like feeling like we got to keep it real, as black folks and whatnot, I think that as far as that authenticity and everything, I think one, what I think is always important is to give yourself grace, right? Like
mm.
it's hard being a black man or a black woman or a black girl or a black boy in America for a lot of different reasons. And it's not always going to be like all your fault that you don't get everything right at the first time. So like, the fact that it might have taken me a couple extra semesters than the next person, like, you know, uh you didn't choose your starting circumstances. So, hopefully you saw enough and did enough to where you didn't do anything too egregious to where now you made some decisions that you can't come back from.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so if you're at that point, then pat yourself on the back and then work from there, right? Uh, and it's funny because throughout my life, like, yeah, that whole staying true to my people or my roots and things like that. I'm a big rap fan, and
You got bars too, right? I hear you got bars too, though, Kwaku.
so that's where Quack came from. That's a different
Yeah,
story. But
yeah.
a guy that I listened to, Benny the Butcher, he just came out
Oh
with a
yeah.
project months back called "Everybody Can't Go," right? And
Mm.
don't feel bad when you get to that point as you grow in life where you feel like some of the people that you were around or some of the things that you had
Mm.
around that all of a sudden, like, it just doesn't feel like it fits. I've had that throughout my life, and
Mm.
just know that, like, it might, when you discard those things in the beginning, it can feel lonely, but in time, it often doesn't take that much time. The right things end up finding you.
Mm.
Just taking yourself out of the situations that don't serve you, that because there's always a pressure of, all right, like, getting out of those situations and then finding the next thing that you think does serve you. That transition is hard, but getting out is the hardest part. And believe it or not, like, after you let some of those things go, people go, whatever, like, the right situations end up finding you and you end up being surprised and you're able to remake your community all over again. So
Mm.
uh yeah, as far as, like, don't feel, I know it's hard. You probably will at some point feel some sort of survivor's remorse, right?
Mm.
Uh, and that's when you have some time to kind of reflect back, you're gonna and you start kind of doing the deep dive on, man, why couldn't everybody just be cool forever or whatever? You realize, like, a lot of those issues are systemic. It wasn't even their fault. It wasn't
Mm.
your fault, but you just realized that it just didn't serve you anymore.
Mm.
And you did what you needed to do. You don't have to be Superman or Superwoman.
Abs-
Yeah.
Absolutely. Kwa, you wise beyond your years, my brother. Um, let's talk about the transition from Champagne to corporate America. So you
Yep.
obviously picked up some tools in college, learning how to interact and relate with people who are not like you, who are not from where you're from. You
Yeah.
obviously picked up some work ethic and some work habits to be able to
Yep.
obtain your engineering degree.
Yep.
And obviously, from a technical standpoint, like you said, it's like a trade. So you gain these technical skill sets at University of Illinois.
I'm good.
Um, did you feel when you got into corporate America? How did you adjust? And I'm not even just talking about from a knowing how to do the engineering work standpoint,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
adjusting to the new world. And oftentimes, probably it's a good chance that you were in an environment that didn't look like you for the most part. How did you make that adjustment from college life to corporate America, where you've been thriving for over the last decade?
Yeah. So as an engineer, I think what I want to say there is, like, engineering corporate America, I feel like is a little bit different. Excuse me. Their experience is a little bit different from anyone else in corporate America. Just because, uh like the technical ability of having to do what you need to do ends up being a little bit paramount, especially in the very beginning, right? Not that you don't still need and require those interpersonal skills, right? But it still very much almost feels like a continuation of college,
Mm,
right? As far as, like, just now applying those skills in new environments. Uh,
mm,
but you do now end up with a whole different people challenge because I mean, if you were lucky enough to get an internship, then you work with some people older than you, right? But
Mm-hmm.
regardless, this is now the first time where you're working with people that are older than you full time, who are giving you instruction, guidance, a reporting structure, and now you have to perform, right? And there's a different level of pressure with that. My first job, my first job was like a crazy job. It was in downstate metropolis, Illinois. It was this uranium conversion facility. I think there's only like one other one in North America.
That
It's
sounds
like
crazy.
it was crazy. It's like it was the first stop shop. It's the first stop shop after you get uranium, after you mine uranium out of the ground, and we process it at this facility before it then goes to another facility and then to the nuclear power plants, right?
Wow.
So, uh, just the and we went under the pretense that the people that actually do the work at the plant, right, the operators that guide the uranium trains and bring the uranium into the process and dry it, heat it up and dry it, and then put it into the reactors and gather the product and the raw materials and the shipping and all that. They have been locked out by the company. And so the plant was still running. They ran the plant with contractors that they brought up from Texas and Louisiana, along with young engineers. And this had been going on for a year before I got there. And there was no telling when the lockout was going to end. And so for 6 months, I was actually an operator just like these guys. So so that's why I say, like, a normal somebody that was a business major or somebody that, just went into some sort of office role right away. Like, that's not always the experience as an engineer, unless you were a software person. But some of the other trades, like civil, mechanical, depend on like which kind of company you go into. Like, we will interact with people that are older than us, that that just by the nature of their job and income, probably a different social class, right? And yeah, these were Texas and Louisiana boys that I was having to navigate working with. Some of them were really good, and some of them were okay but brash. And then going from that, and then actually working with the engineering folks more full time. So then it was just like a bunch of really smart, older technical people. And you just kind of, it was a lot of studying and a lot of asking questions and some mistakes. But you hope that the mistakes are minimal based on, the training, and, you end up having people to help you out to, balance out those mistakes. But so I was at that job for 18 months, and then we got laid off. But since then, I guess I've been in more what you would call like a more traditional office roles, engineering, design. Still had some plant leadership in there as a production engineer. I did for another 4 years. Had a role one time where I was doing a lot of traveling. You just kind of grow up quick, honestly. I'll say that. Like, my 20s were like a sprint because looking for different jobs. I think I had 3 different jobs in my 20s. And then, I had a job that I was traveling every week. I had this job at the uranium place. And then I had this job where I was in this plastics plant production engineer for 4 years, where I was responsible for, monitoring quality and just production rates and any kind of like non-conformance issues at the customer or any kind of process safety incidents that would happen, during the day, at night. I was on call. It was crazy, you know. So again, like you end up finding that, yeah, the nice thing is it was well paying, but you still end up having a slightly different life than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And, just kind of making peace with that, Uh, but um, I don't know if I got too away from your question, but
No.
as far as like, adjusting to corporate life as an engineer, uh, I think for anybody watching who is interested, it just can be a little bit different than some of the other majors out there where you're kind of going straight into an office environment. It feels like a trade. You're not quite a pipe fitter, you're not a welder, you're not an electrician, but much of it can feel like it. So,
Mm, And so let's, as we wrap up, I want to ask you some questions that will be beneficial to somebody who is potentially on the same career journey as you.
mhm.
Um, um, I guess let's just start there. If you had advice for somebody, maybe they're in maybe they're in high school, maybe they're in college right now, and they're considering going down the same similar career path as you. What advice would you give them to be able to get to, to be able to get going and have a really good start toward their overall goals? And on top of that, what perspective do you have for them, considering the fact that you've had to basically um, live a different life in college and even in your 20s, and I'm pretty sure even right now you've had to
Mhm.
live a different kind of lifestyle, uh,
Yep.
denying yourself some things, delaying some things to be
Yep.
able to accomplish to where you're at. So two part, like, what advice would you have? And what do you add on to the idea of living and foregoing pleasure now, foregoing trips now, foregoing the parties now, the clubs now, all of that kind of stuff? And just ultimately, I guess that question would be: is it worth it? Is it worth that sacrifice?
Okay. So, um, where I believe it's worth it is I haven't had student loans in 10 years. So
Wow.
I'm not quite sure how the economics would end up working out. And I had to pay for half of my college.
Mm,
So is that right? I think scholarships and my parents' loans probably covered half, and then my own personal loans, half of that. So but yeah, part of it was like I, my first that first year and a half in that one job, I was living in a place where the standard of living was super low, rent was super low, and then I was also working overtime, and so I was just stacking money, and so.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Uh, but, but regardless, even if I hadn't started off in a role like that,
Mm.
uh, likely still could have done something similar. Um,
So what you're saying is it's money, it's money there, it's money there. People make
it's,
these
it's money there.
sacrifices.
So for the sacrifices, yes, yes, yep. As a guy in his mid-30s, still single, I'm living in my second home purchase,
Mm,
right? So uh, just from that standpoint, like you don't have to worry about the money. You shouldn't have to worry
yeah,
about the money part. Uh,
yeah.
as far as advice, hardcore advice. So if you're just going into college, pick no, and this applies to no matter what engineering major you pick. All of the engineering courses and the science and math courses are difficult. So the other courses that you need to take, make sure that they're the easiest ones that you think of.
Mm,
Don't.
mm.
I made that mistake my freshman year. I tried to take like economics and didn't know that our economics teacher was wrote the book on economics that's being taught at U of I, and he was just super anal about
Yeah,
what the answers would be, right?
yeah.
Like take the easiest one, take the easiest things. Some of your other interests, you might have to table a little bit. And you would just have to be okay with that, right?
Mm,
Uh you can always you can always, try like if something like business or economics is something that you are also curious about, there are career options after that. You can kind
right.
of, depending on where you land in your career, you may be able to finesse that without even another degree at your company. It just kind of depends. That also often depends on how good your grades are early on. The people that get the best grades and end up getting some internships early end up getting some of the more career charted jobs where maybe you're working rotationals and things like that, you know, you end up, 10 years later, if you're able to stay with the same company, maybe you're in some role where it wasn't it's not as super technical as when you started. And now you're getting some of that business exposure, right? If that isn't an option for you, whether your grades were good or not, you can always try and, get your master's in business, or I have plenty of friends that, stopped engineering altogether and went to business school full time for 2 years and then changed careers that way. And then like, as far as, I guess life as an engineer, there can be some long hours depending on, if there's some deadline and things like that. But I will say, like, compared to some other jobs that you'll hear about, consulting and things, like, one thing is we usually start work early, but like my job, like I start work between 8 and 8:30. It's not the standard 9 to 5, right? Earlier in my career, I used to start work at like 7. It just kind of depends. But they're mostly 8 to 9 hour jobs. You're not going to be you usually won't be taking work home with you. So from a work-life balance that way, I think that is attractive. Now, chemical engineering specifically, I will say, like, these jobs are in industries that can be dangerous. And so because of that, they're not always city center. So I've done a lot of commuting in my career, something that I've always worked on trying to see if I can minimize, and ended up just saying, you know what, I don't care. I want to live in Chicago. So thankfully, I've got a hybrid situation right now where I get some days at home to work from home. But that's something that I didn't necessarily know going into college. So, if you're early on, just knowing that living in city center can be difficult as a chemical engineer. If you end up going to Houston, it's a little bit easier. Outside of that, you might have to live in the burbs a little bit. But other than that, what engineering does is, like, you always have like a certain understanding of how things work on a fundamental level, right? And so, like, that's just always cool. Like, I have an idea of like how my furnace is working right now, or like, the plumbing in my building, like some of the issues that might arise, like I can, like, it makes sense to me, things around you, or, just knowing that, like, everything that we use is crude oil based, from soaps to, whatever materials you were used to making to put your car together, to a whole host of things, just things like that. Whichever discipline of engineering you go into, you end up understanding how things actually work on a fundamental level. And that's just always something cool to know, I will say that because of how technical the field is, who you are outside of the job may end up like, and this is honestly for anyone, like, don't feel like the job is what's going to define who you are. I think that's something that I have learned, like, as I've matured, right? Like, I'm not an engineer. Like, who I am is like how I am when I talk to you. Like, do I look you in your eyes and listen to you? That's who you are. And are you able to share experiences with me? And you're like, you know what? I can trust this person. That's who you are. and just your general outlook on the world around you. That's who you are. How
Mm,
you contribute and feed your family is one thing, and hopefully it's as noble as you can muster, right? Uh, but you outside of the job is also important. So
mm. That is awesome, and that brings us back full circle, because as we wrap up, the foundation of this podcast is we believe that if you see it, you can be it. If you see black engineers as a young black boy, maybe you believe that you can become one, and you'll become one. If you see, that was my story. I saw professional athletes that looked like me all over the place, so it
yeah.
made me believe that I could do it as well.
Hmm.
Talk to me about, well, I guess the question I have for you is, if somebody is watching this information, somebody somehow gets a hold of this content on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or wherever, and they're inspired by the conversation.
Yep.
What is a good way for people to maybe get in contact with you if they wanted to learn, maybe if they're in college and they want to learn about how to get an internship, or how to,
Yeah.
some science-based information, or they're making a transition into corporate America from college. How can people get a hold of you, Kwaku, if they wanted to potentially get a little bit of coaching or mentorship from you in that area?
Absolutely. Please add me on LinkedIn, Kwaku Okraku. You can find me on LinkedIn, and don't be shy to ask either general or specific questions. Nobody's really added me and asked me anything of that nature. So,
Mm.
I would be super interested to read your long paragraph or short 2, 3 sentences. I have that type of time. If whatever you're asking, I realize I can't help quite in those specifics, I'll point you to someone or the resources that can help you. Right. And we'll keep in touch. I do some. I'm so the National Society of Black Engineers. They have, which is it started in the colleges, but they also have professional chapters. Uh, I'm a little involved in the Chicago professional chapter here, so like. If you do end up coming in contact with me on LinkedIn, and I know of some resources that they're already working on, whether it's a career fair or internships that are being passed around, I can get you in touch, get you involved. Yeah, I'd say that's the easiest way. That's the easiest way.
Man, great information, man. And I second what you said on how, even if you offer this, how so few people actually will take somebody up on this, not realizing that
Mhm.
there are so many people out there like you who are waiting for somebody to reach out to them so they can
Yeah,
have a phone call with them, grab a cup of coffee with them, give them some coaching or advice. And so hopefully somebody watches this and realize that he's not just saying this, like he actually means it. If you reach out to him on LinkedIn, he will be willing to assist you.
yeah,
Kwaku,
that's right.
that, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
No problem.
I
Man.
was always impressed by your level of intelligence and accomplishment. But one thing that is so interesting about you is you are not the stereotypical engineer. The
Okay.
stereotypical engineer is super smart, but maybe an inability to communicate, or not really a people
Yeah,
person. Or, I mean, you
yeah.
have the total package. You can communicate with people. Your stories are amazing. I thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I know that the future holds many, many more career accomplishments and success. And so, thank you for talking to us, and on your little pit stop as you continue to go to higher and bigger successes. So thank you so much, my brother.
Tony, I appreciate you, man. When we last touched base, and you told me you had this going on, I was like, absolutely. We just find the time, and my regards to your family as always. So
Thank you,
blessings.
bro. Thank you. Thank you.
That's right.
And that's it.